Good morning, my name is Oleksandr, and I want to thank everybody who joins us in Ukraine Media Center Ukraine Forum. It's been 9 years of the war, and today is day 419 of the full-scale invasion of our homeland by a Russian aggressor, and I traditionally want to thank the representatives of all the mass media who tell the world the truth about a heroic resistance and the truth about this war. A brief schedule of events for today is as follows. At 1300 we will be talking about the situation in Melitopol. Joining us online will be Mayor of Melitopol Ivan Fedorov, and at 1430 we will be talking about prohibition of import of Ukrainian grains into Poland, Hungary and other countries of European Union. Joining us will be Dmytro Solomchuk, member of the parliament and a member of the parliamentary committee on agrarian and land policy. And now we will be talking about the flooding in Ukraine, how the situation is changing, and what measures are being taken, and what should we expect for. And I want to invite to the microphone Illia Perevozchykov, head of the Hydrological Forecast Department at the Ukrainian Hydrometeorological Center of the State Emergency Service of Ukraine, and Oleksandr Khorunzhyy, press officer of the State Emergency Service. So, gentlemen, what's the situation as of today, and what should we expect for? Good morning, dear journalists, dear Ukrainians. For the time being, we were observing, or we were hearing the warning of the Ukrainian Meteorological Center about the weather conditions that may result in flooding. It's worth mentioning that in Volyn and Rivne regions there was a yellow level of threat due to the flooding which resulted from intense rains. And what's most important is that there is flooding in Dnieper, there is seasonal flooding, and the level of water is going up, and the level of threat is ranges from orange to red. Here we're talking about Kyiv, Cherkasy, Poltava, Dnipropetrovsk, Kirovohrad, and Zaporizhzhia regions. There's also high level of water in Chernihiv region. It's worth mentioning that in Kyiv and Chernihiv region, the level of threat is orange, and in Cherkasy, Poltava, Dnipropetrovsk, and Kirovohrad, the level of threat is red, is the highest level of threat. Also, in the section of Dnieper between Chernihiv region, in the border with Belarus, the level of threat is red too, due to the seasonal flooding. As of this morning, I will tell you more details about Kyiv. We observed the stabilization of situation. There is certain flooding in Kyiv region, and in all areas that I mentioned above. In Kyiv, our services observe the flooding of the riverbanks. The islands of Muromets, Trokhanov were flooded, and certain districts in Kyiv region, in the Borispol district and Vyshgorod districts of the Kyiv region. As to the other parts of Dnipro basin, in Cherkasy and Dnipropetrovsk region, some riverbank areas were flooded too, all the way along the riverbed. Any buildings which were standing along the riverbank were flooded in those territories too. Mr. Illia, why is the flooding this year so intense? What do the specialists say about this? Well, let us divide a little bit. The experts, they usually focus their attention, well, mostly journalists and the regular citizens, they use the word flooding. It's a little bit irrelevant because it's a phenomena which is more inherent in such places as Volyn region. Here is just the elevation of level of water, which is a normal phenomena annual phenomena, and many people said that there was no snow this winter, so where it comes from. But the river of Dnipro flows from the north, where there is usually more snow than we have. For example, in January and February in Kyiv, the elevation of level of water was observed even during February. Well, maybe not to such a big scale as now. The level of water was lower back then. So now this is the classic elevation of level of water, the seasonal elevation of water, which resulted from flooding that took place in February. Well, I have to say that we have a complicated hydrological situation this season. All those processes, we were warning about them even on the websites of Ukrainian Hydrological and Meteorological Center and the State Emergency Service of Ukraine. There were warnings which we usually post in case of threat. Well, there was information that the peak of flooding will be on the 22nd of April. Can you confirm that information? Well, we cannot specify the exact date of the flooding peak. It's the process of moving of water along the riverbed. According to our information, according to our calculations, this season will fall from 18th to 27th of April. This will be the peak level of water. For example, in case of Kyiv, it all depends on the operation of Kyiv HPP. Well, talking about Kyiv, some people say that it's the result of some ecological disturbances, and some say that, for example, in the dam of Kakhovka HPP, the water is not being drained, and this is what causes it. Well, this year we can say that the uniqueness is that there was a lot of snow to the north of Ukraine. It all resulted from the intense rains in those areas, and it's just the result of two phenomena being overlapped. So there are no any ecological causes for this flooding this year. And I want to invite Mr. Oleksandr Khorunzhyy, the press officer of the State Emergency Service of Ukraine. We want to talk about the operation of our rescue services, to what extent the residential areas were damaged, where the aid and help is most necessary. Good morning, glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. We are in constant cooperation with the Hydrological and Meteorological Center of Ukraine. We warned the citizens about the flooding, and we started posting these warnings since the beginning of April, and this information is updated on a daily basis. We were preparing for this situation. We created the reserve of forces and material, and now there are about 500 rescuers and 230 units of special material, boats and amphibian vehicles, which are engaged in mitigation of the results of this flood. And there is you can check these pictures on the screen. They show special material which is involved in operations for rescuing people. We use this material in Chernihiv region now. The situation is most complicated there, according to our information, and I want to say that generally, for the time being, the trend is to the fall of the river of water in the north of Ukraine. This is the information from Ukrainian Meteorological Center, and about 1,500 buildings in the residential areas are flooded in Chernihiv, Kirovograd, Dnipropetrovsk, Kyiv and Cherkasy regions. There are also minor floodings in Poltava region. In 330 buildings in Poltava, Chernihiv, Dnipropetrovsk regions are flooding too. In Dnipropetrovsk, Volyn, Rivne, Cherkasy and Poltava regions, about 9,000 hectares of agrarian lands were flooded 2022, the transport communication with 30 settlements is destabilized, is disrupted, one in the Kyiv region and the rest in Chernihiv region, but all the detour roads are equipped to get to those settlements. What else is done? We have special committees which identify the list of rescue services and utility services which would be engaged in case of complication of situation and which will be engaged in mitigation of results of this flooding. In Chernihiv region, to assist the citizens to mitigate the consequences of seasonal flooding, in Chernihiv and Cherkasy regions, we engaged 3 all-terrain vehicles, and there will be 11 to be engaged totally, plus 16 boats. We will create the mobile control posts in the districts of intense flooding, where we deployed the rescue stations, 2 in Chernihiv and 2 in Cherkasy regions. The situation is under full control. Don't make any panic in this regard. We keep receiving the information from Ukraine Hydrological and Meteorological Center. We keep track of the situation, and in case of necessity, we provide all the necessary support and help to the citizens. Since the beginning of works, we helped transport about 1,800 persons. We evacuated 22 persons, including 3 children. And we transported about 270 kilograms of food to the districts where the situation is the most complicated. Again, I want to reiterate this: the situation is under full control and all the necessary reserves and resources to support the citizens are being engaged. Dear colleagues, if we have any questions on the floor, please introduce yourself. Good morning, Marina Shinkarenko, Ukrinform. A couple of days ago, the Service for Restoration of Infrastructure in Kyiv region announced the resumption of transport communication between Kyiv and Ivankiv, and it was announced that certain works will be done in that sector. So what measures were taken to stabilize the situation in that area? Well, the village of Ivankiv in Vyshgorod region, there was an elevation of level of, there was no elevation of level of water observed in the river of Teteriv, so we tried to reestablish the crossing of the river in that area. The situation with transport communication over there is good. Valeria Pashko, Valeria Pashko, Espresso. Good morning. Can you give us some forecast about the Kyiv region and the adjacent areas? Will Kyiv be flooded? Well, it's more of a question maybe to Mr. Illia. He will be able to answer that question. According to information that we have, there will be no big-scale flooding in the area of Kyiv. Well, as to Kyiv, we observe the situation is being stabilized, and even those floodings that we observe for the time being, they are, well, we see that it's probably the peak level. There will be no some catastrophic flooding in Kyiv. Thank you. Dear friends, do we have any more questions on the floor? Yuri Pukhach, Channel 5, good morning. On the annual basis, we observe something like this flooding. Previously, the water was drained in the water reservoirs along the riverbed of Dnieper. Is it possible to do it now to prevent the flooding? Well, look, the situation is like this. This year is unique. The years 22, 23, well, I'm not talking about the horrible situation all across the country, but I'm talking about hydrological situation, the creation of such flooding, the elevation of level of water. The last time it was observed on a level like this, it was back in 2013. As to the second part of your question, you better address it with the representatives of Hydroenergo. Well, it's the matter of control of draining of water. You should address it with Hydroenergo. They have their plans in this regard, and they are in control of the dams of the hydraulic power plants. Well, now that we don't have any more questions on the floor, I want to remind you, joining us was Oleksandr Khorunzhyy, the press officer of the State Emergency Service of Ukraine, and Illia Perevozchykov, head of the Hydrological Forecast Department at the Ukrainian Hydrometeorological Center of the State Emergency Service. Thank you, dear colleagues. Our next briefing is at 1300, and we will be talking about the situation in Melitopol, so bear with us, and glory to Ukraine.